In the previous video, I discussed about the hub listing section of RapidAPI Studio. In this video, let's look at how we can use the hub listing feature of RapidAPI Studio to manage our API by creating an API. For that, you need to log into your RapidAPI Studio account. I've already logged in. Click the Add API Project button on the RapidAPI Studio dashboard right here. Now, give the API a name, add some description, and select the API category. The API that I'm going to add will provide me with the list of users. So I'm going to give it a name as users list and the description as provide users data. Now I am going to select the category from this drop down menu to which my API belongs to. I'm going to click this data category. Going to keep this personal and not my team's account, and I'm going to check this do not import data from option right here and click add API project. After adding the API project, I'll be directed to this request section. I'll explain it in my other video. For the time being, I'm selecting this hub listing from the left side bar. It will change the page and now you will see different tabs like the general, endpoints, gateway, community, monetize as I discussed in my previous video. By default, the general tab will be opened. You can add details in the general tab like creating a README for your API, updating its logo, and so on. Let's scroll down to the bottom. You will see an option to add the base URL right here. I'm going to click this add base URL and going to type my base URL of the API. At the moment, I'm keeping my API project private, but you can check this box and make it public as well if you want. Now I'm going to save this. The next step is to create an endpoint. I'm going to click this endpoints tab right here. It will change the page where now you can see we have options to create a REST endpoint and GraphQL endpoint. Since the API I am using is a REST API, I will click on to create REST API. Now we can see more options to name our API endpoint, give it some description, select its HTTP method from this drop-down menu, write the endpoint path in this bar right here, and provide a bunch of other information about it. So let's now begin with typing the name. I'm typing users list as the name and the description as get a list of users. From this drop-down menu, I'm going to select the get HTTP method and going to type the endpoint right here. That's the REST in this case. And below, I am getting the code snippet. Let's save this right here and move on to the next step, that is to share the API with other people privately, since this is the private API. For this, go to the community tab and select invite users right here. It will show a field where you can search for a user, search an organization, or even a team. Let's go with search a user. I will type the name of the user and in this box right here and then send invite. Make sure the person you invite has signed up on RapidAPI, otherwise you will not be able to find them. The final step is to monetize your API. You can also make the API public. For that, I have to go back to the general and check this visibility box and enable this. Now it states that the API project is public. Now I'll go back to the monetize tab. I've made the API public so anyone can use it from RapidAPI Hub. In the monetize tab, I can select any of the plans, the public or the private plan. I'm going to stick with the basic plan, that's the free. Let's click this view in hub button right here to view the API in RapidAPI Hub. Here is the API, it states it's free, and let's click this test endpoint to test the API. And we're getting a 200 status code that indicates that the API is working perfectly fine, and here is the response. I am getting the list of users. This was one of the example of the get HTTP method. If you want to add other endpoints like the post, delete, and other, I'm going back to the endpoints tab right here, and I'm going to create another endpoint. Let's say I have to create an endpoint for the post method. I'm going to name it as create a user, and the description same, creates the user. Now from this drop down menu, I'm going to select this post HTTP method and give it the endpoint, which is this, and save it. Let's click this view in hub again to see if the post HTTP method is working fine or not. To check the post HTTP method, I'm going to select this post from this left bar, the endpoints part, and here scrolling down, I'm going to give the values in this body. Since I'm going to create a new user, so I'm going to write name Maham. Similarly, I'm going to enter the email, and here I've added the email as well. After giving the body, I'm going to click this test endpoint, and I'm getting a 201 status code. That means that I have created a user by the name Maham and email mahamcodes@gmail.com. How simple is that? In this video, you learned to use hub listing section of RapidAPI Studio to manage your API by creating your own API. In the next video, you'll learn about testing the API and even debugging it using RapidAPI Studio. So stay tuned.